Following President Joe Biden's announcement that he has a plan in place to forgive some portion of student loans, offering some relief to student loan borrowers, the wealthy couldn't stop themselves by going on the corporate press to talk about how this is a terrible, awful idea. In fact, during the press conference in which Biden announced this plan, the reporters asked the questions you would expect them to ask. So let's take a quick look at that.
Is this unfair to people who paid their student loans or chose not to take out loans?
Is it fair to people who, in fact, do not own multi-billion-dollar businesses if they want these guys to give them all a tax break? Is that fair? What do you think?
What about people who paid their loans, though, struggle to pay their loans, and now others don't have to?
What? Okay, look. I want you guys to understand, we're not harsh toward Biden simply because we dislike Biden. Biden, to me, he's not a good guy or a bad guy. He's a politician. So you judge based on the rhetoric, but more importantly, the policy. Now, while his debt forgiveness plan leaves us desiring a lot more, obviously, it's still going to provide much needed relief to student loan borrowers. The average student loan borrower has about $30,000 in student loan debt, but of course we know endless stories of students who have far more than that. However, I will say the way he handled that question was perfect. And that brings me to what we've been seeing all over the internet, all over television today. And it's the same argument about how could you do that? It's not fair. It's just not fair. All these other people who have paid off their student loans, they didn't get any help. It's not fair. It's not fair. Well, for the people who did manage to pay off their student loans, I'd venture to say they probably went to school at a time when tuition wasn't astronomically priced. And secondly, if you're salty about other people's lives getting a little easier, you gotta check your priorities, okay? Check your priorities. But putting that aside, I wanna go to this tweet from the House Judiciary GOP. They write, if you take out a loan, you pay it back, period. Oh, do you? Do you? Interesting. Let's take a look at the next tweet. This is from Cap Action, where they list all of these Republican lawmakers who took PPP loans during the coronavirus pandemic. And these are all loans that were forgiven. They were forgiven. I should also note many of these people were already independently wealthy and probably didn't need any loans to begin with. But you got Matt Gaetz. He received a PPP loan that was nearly $500,000, $476,000, and it was forgiven. We didn't hear anyone in the corporate press cry about that. You have Marjorie Taylor Greene, $180,000 forgiven. Greg Pence, $79,441. Look at this Vern Buchanan fellow in Florida, $2.8 million in PPP loans that was forgiven. Okay, I mean, the list goes on and on. You've got Mark Wayne Mullen, $988,700. You've got Carol Miller, a Republican from West Virginia, $3.1 million. Again, it's not just about them getting the loan. These are loans that were forgiven. Don't you wonder why there's absolutely no concern about that in the press? But the idea of a student getting $10,000 of student loan debt forgiven, like that makes them lose their minds. Like that's all they've been talking about today, how unfair it is. Oh, it might lead to inflation. Really? Let's see the receipts. How is it gonna lead to inflation? I wanna understand how it works. You just say it. You just say it. I mean, never mind the fact that there's been a pause on student loan repayments during COVID, which obviously puts more money in people's pockets. Was that really the cause of inflation, or could it be the Federal Reserve pumping money into big banks, which they then use to do corporate stock buybacks? Could it be supply chain issues because we exploit underpaid labor in other countries? And once there's a pandemic and once there are shutdowns and once there are disruptions, there's less supply. that can't keep up with demand? Could that be because what's leading to inflation? No, that anything they don't like, this is what drives me crazy about inflation narratives. Anything the corporate press doesn't like policy-wise, they'll automatically attach it to inflation, automatically. Oh, you're gonna help ordinary people? Inflation, we're worried about inflation. They did it with Build Back Better. They're doing it now with modest assistance to student loan borrowers. But by the way, we were talking about Mark Wayne Mullen, right? Who got nearly $1 million of PPP loans forgiven. He also couldn't help himself but tweet about what Biden did today. He writes, "We do not need farmers and ranchers, small business owners, and teachers in Oklahoma paying the debts of Ivy League lawyers and doctors across the United States. This places undue burden on those already suffering due to the weight of Biden's failed economic policy." Fascinating, because all the people that you just mentioned also happen to subsidize the research and development for the same pharmaceutical drugs that they are then price gouged on. No concern about that, Mark Wayne. No concern. No worries about that at all. I would argue that's a failed economic policy that you support, but you don't talk about it. No one talks about it. Drives me crazy. Let's go to Steven Crowder. This is amazing. Student loan forgiveness sounds really nice to illegal immigrants, people with no life experience, people who don't have families yet, and people who use preferred pronouns. Like, the tweet itself really makes no sense. So are you alleging that undocumented immigrants are applying for federal loans? And also people who don't have families yet. Okay, so he's trying to make a point here about like, families are having to foot the bill for these students. How dare Biden attempt to assist ordinary people in making their economic situation just slightly better, ever so slightly. Well, Steven Crowder, let's take a look at how much you took out in PPP loans. Oh wow, took out $70,445, and the amount forgiven, I'm not really sure how it works out this way, but $71,208. I'm guessing the interest was included. Yes, includes any accrued interest. So, hey, I'm pretty sure Steven Crowder's doing real well. I'm trying to understand how he was impacted by the coronavirus pandemic. I mean, he's able to work from a studio. He doesn't have to be out and about. He's not a frontline worker. He's not a grocery store worker. He's not an essential worker, that's for sure. He's not even an essential part of the media. But he got $70,000 in PPP loans, and it was all forgiven. So he should be a man of his word and pay every dollar back to the US taxpayer. 70% of Americans who were recently polled on forgiving student loan debt were in favor of forgiving student loan debt. That's the majority of the country. Because guess what? The majority of the country who are not represented by corporate media or rich right-wingers on YouTube understand the pain, they understand the suffering, and they want to help their fellow Americans out. I would venture to say that's actual patriotism. But Steven Crowder loves to pad his pockets with that government cheese and then point his finger at others who are getting any assistance whatsoever. Let's go to the next one. I like this graphic. It was shared by Ken Klippenstein, and it gives you a sense of all the wealthy people who were able to get PPP loans. Now, not all of them were forgiven, but Jared Kushner, who got his net worth is $800 million. He qualified for a $3 million PPP loan, $3 million, and it was forgiven. Kanye West, we don't know if it was forgiven. He's worth $2 billion, and he received almost 2.4 million in PPP loans. Jay-Z, he's worth 1.3 billion. He received over 1.1 million in PPP loans. Then you've got Diddy, who's worth 900 million. He received nearly $2 million in PPP loans, and they were forgiven. Same with Paul Pelosi, notorious alleged insider trader, because his wife, Nancy Pelosi, is a member of Congress who's privy to insider information that they could, of course, trade stocks on. Homeboy's worth a lot of money, $120 million. He received a PPP loan to the tune of 1.7 million, and that was forgiven. Same with Khloe Kardashian. She received a $1.2 million PPP loan, forgiven. I mean, you guys see what I'm trying to get at here? Please spare me the concerns about the lack of fairness in giving people a little bit of money. And by the way, not even giving them money, just forgiving a small portion of their student loans. That's it. That's all it is. I mean, we're not talking about all federal student loans getting forgiven. We're talking about a means-tested program. No one qualifies for it if they're making $125,000 a year or more. And the most a borrower can expect from what Biden announced today is $20,000 in debt forgiveness. That's it. But they look at that and they think, no, this is an unacceptable redistribution of wealth. No, people who make that argument are just garbage. They really are. And anyone who buys into it is watching way too many right-wingers on YouTube who love the government cheese. Again, let me reiterate. And also watching too much corporate media that's fear-mongering about inflation. No, forgiving $10,000 to $20,000 in student loan debt for borrowers is not what's gonna cause inflation. It's not what's causing inflation. There's corporate greed associated with why we're seeing inflation. There are supply chain issues. And of course, the Federal Reserve pumping money into banks and corporations that also had a lot to do with inflation. But you never get the full story because at the end of the day, the elite love to point fingers at ordinary people who are already facing a significant disadvantage with a government that doesn't represent them, with press that doesn't represent them, and an economic system that constantly puts them and their needs in the back burner. That's the reality of the situation.